somebody asked, from here it looks like the policymakers and legislators are making decisions on tech issues that they don't really understand. Did you find this to be true or not?
I wouldn't say I agree with that. I think there is generally a reasonable humility and caution about technology policy. It is very hard because it's moving quickly and it's complex. So it does require people to take the time to understand it. And there are a lot of people in the government who did that in ways that largely underappreciated. So take cybersecurity, for example. There are people in the government, Feld-Weiser, someone I worked with at the Department of Homeland Security. He left. He's now going to be the Chief Information Security Officer at Sony. Phil is someone who knows cybersecurity. He's an authority in the field. He understood those issues. The administration has proposed an approach on cybersecurity. I was able to work closely with Phil on that. I would put him up against anyone in the private sector. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy to know what to do, right? It's two different questions. One is, do you know the field, do you know the technologies, and do you know what to do about it? I wouldn't say that people didn't know the field. I would say, it's often, these are not easy issues to understand what to do, and people's level of tolerance for government risk-taking is often low. And so you have this innate conservative, orientation, which is understandable, but it also is somewhat at odds with technology policy. So smart grid is another example. State public utility commissions are among the most conservative entities in the governmental actor ecosystem. And here they are engaged in technology and innovation policy overseeing smart grid. So they are rightly terrified, and they want to learn. And one of the challenges of the federal government is to use its greater resources to help educate state regulators so they can make informed decisions.
What percentage of your individual meetings were held at Caribou Coffee?
So for those who don't know me, or you missed the going away party, Ray Gifford teased me by saying the casual fast food dining establishments in Boulder would miss me. They did, but there are ones in Washington that benefited. I would say it's fair to say every single morning after I came into work, I used to drive around 8, often would have some call or something, and then I would go to get my coffee and oatmeal at Caribou Coffee, and invariably I was scheduled to meet someone there. And probably every afternoon I would go get coffee and I'd meet somebody there. But again, it's important to know me, I mixed up my casual fast food dining establishment, so I had a rotation system. There was Caribou. There was also Cozy across the street.
Where we spent many times.
Yes,
many
exactly.
hours.
Cozy. There was a Starbucks. That probably is the least popular of those. And then for lunch, by the way, when I go to lunch, there's a Roti down the street, which is a really good casual fast food dining establishment. If you're over in DC, I'd recommend it. So those are probably my top 4 in the rotation.
Which one did you miss the most?
Roti.
No, in Boulder.
Oh, Boulder I missed. So I'd say, Panera and Chipotle are probably personal favorites. And there was a Chipotle in DC, but it was like further away. And then just before I left, they put a Panera in DuPont Circle.
Progress in Washington. Sort of on the same lines of the meeting, how you allocate time, etc. Just a percentage. What percentage of time did you know in advance would you waste?
That's a great question. I only had one. So I took virtually, if not every single meeting anyone asked me. There was only one meeting that was a complete waste of time. I met with someone who literally just wanted to network. It was the worst networking meeting I've ever had. For all the students in the room, don't ever network without any remote purpose whatsoever. I kind of was like, what's your ask? It's like, just want to get to talk to you. And I'm like, I don't see my family enough to just talk to a random person who wants a meeting. And this person, by the way, the sad thing was, he then started hanging out in Caribou Coffee every morning. And then I'm going there, and I go there with someone else, and there he'd be, just like hanging around. So that was the only time that was like, the total waste of time. Almost always there was something of value. And another thing, by the way, that was good about it, if you had those mornings in Caribou, is you can always leave when you want to. If you realize it's a waste of time, you can kind of be a little bit more aggressive about cutting it short. Bob Dole taught me that. Bob Dole was quoted in the New York Times. Someone said, wow, it's awesome how you would always go to other senators' offices to talk to them. That shows such respect for them. He said, no, that's not it at all. I can get up and leave anytime I want.
That's awesome. We saw at least 2 pictures of you with President Obama. Describe your first meeting.
So, and the first time I met him was actually here in Boulder during the, he gave a talk. And the people may not realize you have him in person. And Heidi, my wife, when she met him, was like, he's actually a more physically intimidating presence than you might realize. He's somewhat tall, he's got a very firm handshake, definitely an arresting voice. So maybe it's the fact, obviously, the fact he's president helps, but I will say he's a more imposing, he's a incredibly, like you see with your kids, playful, kind, sweet person. But I would say, I was much more intimidated in that sense than with Joe Biden, who has like this toothy smile, he's like all in a much more engaging, disarming way almost.
An entrepreneur in the audience says, I'm concerned about the patent wars where somebody who doesn't ever plan to develop the technology holds a patent for an idea I came up with. He doesn't ask the question at the tail end of it, but he's concerned about it. Do you have any sense that there's any real change happening? I know that there's patent reform going on. I have a point of view about it, but I'm curious as to what your view of is Congress really doing something substantive here, or are they going to pass something that's essentially kicking the can down the road and say, oh, we passed patent reform, but it doesn't really have an impact?
So there's two problems. And I have to say, when I briefed Larry Summers on this, it was really one of the highlights. Larry is so smart, and you get to the heart of it. It was a little bit like working for Justice Ginsburg, where someone is just doesn't know a field, but you go talk to them, and their general sense is so good that it's as if they understand it really well. So the first problem, and this was Larry's phrase, is McKinsey meets the Patent Office. Given that the Patent Office is in innovation policy, you would think it is a crown jewel of government. It is treated in a way with respect and support so that it does its job extremely effectively. If you thought that, you would be deadly wrong. Instead, quite the opposite. There have been people appointed to head it who had no understanding of technology or patents whatsoever, but who were former congressmen looking for a job. They are regular times where the revenues that it gets from fees that people are paying to get patents were funneled away from the office to do other things, thereby leaving the office understaffed, so they got a backlog of patents. And finally, there's the technology itself that the Patent Office used, which was nothing short of a disaster. At the beginning of the administration, people could file patents electronically. They'd have to literally print them out and re-enter them into a different system. So, first problem, which is a real problem, called McKinsey meets the Patent Office. Can we enable our patent system in the office to operate more effectively? By that I mean issuing higher quality patents. That's obviously one of the core problems in the system. Issuing them quicker, making a decision. Enabling people to review their decisions more quickly and cheaply in post-grant review. The bill that's winding its way through Congress and the leadership of David Kapos, the PTO, is set up to do a very good job on those issues. There is a second set of issues that are not unrelated. I'll call it the patent litigation mess. For those who haven't seen the diagram of all the smartphone patent wars, be nervous. It's scary. And for those who haven't read Brad's blogs and others' discussions of this, obviously the phenomenon of non-practicing entities filing cases in the Eastern District of Texas is hard to square with anything we might call, useful progress of science. And for those who missed the NPR story on that, it's really good. Now, question. How much is the legislation going to deal with that problem? The answer is, insofar as the first problem, less bad patents, cheaper review, helps solve the second, which will be somewhat. But given the magnitude of the challenge, it's only somewhat. How else can we get there? There are a few different things I'd note. One is something the PTO is focused on. You can enforce, particularly in software and IT, the written description and enablement requirement. So you're not supposed to be able to file a patent that is a prospect for something that might be invented someday. That's not what the patent system was meant to be. You're supposed to actually have to invented it, described it, and enable it to be put to practice, and then you get a patent. If you did enforce that requirement, which the Patent Office finally, for the first time a year ago, has now guidance to examiners to enforce that requirement, you can get rid of and not enforce a lot of patents that should never have been granted, which are, as Brad said, able to be used strategically in litigation, and that are not about motivating invention. So that is a promising doctrinal tool. I think we all should be nervous about this problem, because if we don't make progress on it, it's going to continue to be a tax on innovation, not a spur to innovation.